Did you call Bank? Nah, I called Kevin Labanc. He had a phenomenal preseason, and it might lead to some good things. And also, before the puck drops, let me share some of my early predictions. We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Elliott scores! Oh, Steven stepped up, nailed it. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here at the Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils driver for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. Well, it's finally here, ladies and gentlemen. The start of the new NHL season. The New Jersey Devils are in Prague, and they are scheduled to take on Lindy Ruff and the Buffalo Sabres. Puck drop is scheduled for 1 p.m. And I know that when this episode goes live, it doesn't give you guys ample time to check it out and also gear up for the start of the new season, because I'm excited as well. I love the month of October because we get so many sports all in one. But I figured I still need to share some of my early season predictions, and I will come back to it at the end of the season and see how correct I was. And I just want to have some fun with it. But before we get into all that, that's the meat and potatoes of today's episode. I want to talk about preseason. Don't worry, it's not going to be anything negative, despite the Devils only racking up one win this year in preseason. I want to give a couple shout outs. The first is to Jeremy Brodeur, the son of legendary goalie Martin Brodeur. I've said it on this show before, but I think Martin Brodeur was the greatest goalie of all time. And the fact that his son was in between the pipes, albeit for a preseason game, against the New York Rangers and got the W, how can you not be romantic about sports? Bill Spalding, Ken Danico, they had the call. I'm sure it was a surreal feeling for both of them. I had Bill on the show a few weeks ago, and I asked him if he could go back in time and cover any sporting event in history. He said one of his choices would be 2003 when the Devils beat the Mighty Ducks in Game 7, because he had a lot of love for his color commentator, Ken Danico. Speaking of which, Dano was teammates with Martin Brodeur, and now he's in the booth calling a game in which Brodeur's son is competing in it. It's just a layer of weird on weird on weird. And to add on to that, Jonathan Quick got the nod for the Rangers. And as we all know, many years ago, back in 2012, Brodeur was on the losing end against Jonathan Quick and the LA Kings in the Stanley Cup Finals. And I guess if it couldn't get any weirder, a couple years later, the LA Kings beat the New York Rangers in the 2014 Stanley Cup Finals, and now Quick is in New York. Like I said, how can you not be romantic about sports? I think some Devils fans, past, present, maybe future, I don't know, shedded a tear when Bill Spalding said Brodeur kicks it out, because it's been a while since we've heard the name Brodeur, Devils uniform, Devils game being said on air. Nowadays, when Brodeur's name is mentioned, it's mostly people talking about his front office role, his history, but no, his son, Jeremy Brodeur of the Adirondack Thunder, in between the pipes, filling in for a lot of Devils players who had to cut their preseason early because they traveled across the pond to compete in Prague. Just amazing, incredible, and I wanted to take the time to discuss it on this show. But let's talk about another big talking point, and that is Kevin Labanc. How does this meme go? I wasn't familiar with your game. Well, I was familiar with your game, but I kind of doubted you because I didn't expect much from a PTO signing. In his last 3 preseason appearances, Labanc racked up 6 goals. Talk about being a scoring machine. And he had a hat trick in the final preseason matchup against the Philadelphia Flyers. I will admit, when I first heard the news that Kevin Labanc signed a PTO deal with New Jersey, as you guys know, my expectations were rather low for him because he was coming from the San Jose Sharks and his career, it was going downhill fast after his strong performance in the 2019 playoffs against the Vegas Golden Knights. He was just never the same player, and the Sharks were trying their best to make him happy. Ultimately, that relationship didn't work out, and now here's Labanc. And I was actually talking with Joseph Stanislaw, aka Jersey Joe, about this a few days ago, and Jersey Joe was like, "Hey, I wouldn't mind if Labanc was playing in the AHL." And I said, "I agree. I think Labanc definitely has some potential, but he's really going to have to put on a string of strong performances if he wants to turn some heads for the Devils." And Tom Fitzgerald even warned him and said, "Look, be prepared for worst case scenario, but Kevin Labanc might be earning his way back to the NHL and earn a contract because you can't ignore the fact that he had 6 goals. That is incredible. I don't care if it's against other AHL players or whatever the case might be. It's not an easy thing to do. And people were basically wondering, like, what would a contract for Labanc look like? And James Nichols of New Jersey Hockey Now put this out on social media and said, my guess is a 2-way deal. Start in Utica and called up when necessary. Up to him to make it difficult to send him back. He needs to prove he can do it still when the points matter, because he is right, which is this is preseason, and as great as his stats were, they don't really count for anything. And I've always said take preseason with a grain of salt, but in this case, I need to make an exception. We were talking about this in the Pucks and Pitchforks group chat. Somebody in the chat added on to that and said 2-way deal is only a salary thing. He'd still have to pass through waivers, sign him, and move him to the Devils roster. He's an NHL player. And another thing that someone mentioned was that they didn't understand why the Devils can't just give him a 1-way deal. Even if he's going to the minors, it's still a buried salary, and he might not accept a 2-way knowing someone could claim him. And wouldn't it be funny if the Sharks just claimed him and said, like, "Oh, let's try this again because you're proving something." And it's just like, what would the roster look like if Kevin Labanc is added to it? People were saying, like, scratch Nathan Bastian and put Kevin Labanc on the same line as Paul Cotter and Curtis Lazar. I said I don't think that's going to happen just because you still need to give Nathan Bastian a chance. And it seems like Sheldon Keefe is really liking that meat line. And I even said it in my hot takes episode. I think Nathan Bastian gets an unfair amount of blame. He's still an important piece. We saw that during the 2022-2023 season, but there's another player that you could consider sending down. And we talked about it in the Pucks and Pitchforks group chat, which is Curtis McDermott. I said it again in my hot takes episode. Curtis McDermott has a very cheap contract, and I don't think anyone is going to claim McDermott, if we're being completely honest. And he didn't really show that much during preseason. If anything, he showed how inefficient he can be because he was racking up a lot of penalties, and the only way McDermott gets his rest if he's getting into fights. And Luke Hughes is also on IR. The Devils are still dealing with a few injuries here and there. Here's my final verdict. I think Kevin Labanc deserves a shot on the Devils roster because I know it's preseason. I understand that a lot of teams aren't putting their A team or their B team. But the thing is, like, you can't ignore the fact that he scored that many goals in limited playing time. That should show some sort of potential. And remember, he stepped up his game when it mattered most during the 2019 playoffs in game 7 in an elimination game, and the Sharks were able to overcome the Golden Knights. Labanc, he is the definition of hold my beer, because I had my doubts and he went out and showed everybody why he deserves another chance with a different team. I think Fitzy found a diamond in the rough with Labanc, and I think he does deserve another chance. We'll see what happens. We'll see if a contract does come into fruition, but as we all know, he did not travel with the team to Prague. But a lot can happen when the Devils come back to the States. Only time will tell. Now, before we continue with today's episode and I give you guys some of my early season predictions, let me tell you about FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Look at the odds, and please remember to always gamble responsibly. Okay, the Devils are set to play the Sabres in a few hours to open up their season, but I still want to share some of my season predictions before the season actually starts, because that's fair game, right? On Pucks and Pitchforks, a lot of the writers came together and we were given some prompts to answer for a big article that a lot of us collaborated on. We were given questions like who's going to be a breakout player, which team is going to surprise you, and of course, where are the Devils going to finish in the Metropolitan Division? I want to share some of those prompts on this show and give you guys my answers. I will leave a link in the description to the full article if you want to check out some of my colleagues' responses. But the first prompt we're going to go over is who's going to be the breakout player for the Devils. I said Dawson Mercer. And here's why. He has a lot to prove after coming off a subpar season. He can't afford another slow start. Otherwise, and I've said it in a prior episode, he might get the Alexander Holtz treatment, which is constantly seeing his name in trade discussions. I have no doubt in the back of my mind that Dawson Mercer is a very good player. But the thing is like Alexander Holtz is now gone. And there's always a scapegoat on the team. Who's going to see their name in trade discussions? Who might get you a different big piece? And that person might be Dawson Mercer, because the thing is, like, I don't think Dawson Mercer is anywhere close to reaching his full potential. And the fact that he can play in all the games and not get injured or be a healthy scratch, it should tell you what he is as a player. And I hope he continues his Ironman streak, knock on wood. But the thing is, like, that's not enough. You actually got to show that you're a legitimate goal scorer. You can rack up the points. You can do all sorts of things. Otherwise, I'm sure the Devils will have no issue parting ways with you, especially since they have to sign a few other big name players to big time contracts like Luke Hughes at the conclusion of this season and Shimon Nemeth at the conclusion of next season. Dawson Mercer's seat might be feeling a little bit warm. And how do I define a breakout player? Well, I'm not going to pick Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, or Timo Meier because they're already established NHL players. I'm looking at players who are under the radar and can get their name into the spotlight even more. If I had to choose last season, I might have chosen Jesper Bratt just because I'm like, he's still underrated. And I think once he gets an all-star bid, then he's going to earn more recognition. So my breakout player, is Dawson Mercer, just because he has a lot to prove after posting a lot of career lows this past season. What is the one player storyline you're most interested in right now? I've talked about it on this show before, and I even wrote an article for Pucks and Pitchforks, and it was one of my favorite pieces I put together, but it was Stefan Noesen. He revived his career with the Chicago Wolves, the AHL affiliate of the Carolina Hurricanes, which, by the way, let me get off topic real quick. I did get credentialed for the Hurricanes and Devils game in Raleigh, North Carolina on October 15th. So if you see me in the area, don't be afraid to come up and say hi. But anyway, that's a couple weeks from now. Back to Stefan Noesen. Noesen has been through a lot, but he's a completely different player, which landed him a 3-year deal with the Devils. And as you guys know, I was a huge fan of the Devils reuniting with him just because I'm like, look what he did with the Hurricanes. He was physical. He did faceoffs at times. He's never a threat to score, but come playoff time, he's electrifying. He's not afraid to throw his body around. I would say Noesen was a big X factor piece for the Hurricanes during their playoff runs the past couple seasons. The Devils saw that firsthand in the second round of the 2023 playoffs. And I think Noesen can do the same thing. And I've been rather impressed what he's done in preseason with his forechecking, his net front presence. Look out for Noesen, everybody. That storyline, just him bouncing between the NHL and the AHL, never really establishing his footing, being a late bloomer. I think he had to deal with a knee injury at one point. Now he has a young, growing family. Noesen is going to be one of my favorite players to look out for this upcoming season. Watch out. Okay, which NHL team will be the biggest surprise or the biggest disappointment, not including the Devils? Surprise. I don't know how many of you know this, but I actually did grow up in Michigan. And I got my bachelor's degree from a college in Michigan. And both my parents went to the University of Michigan. And I think it's time to see Hockey Town, the Detroit Red Wings, back in the playoffs, because they had a lengthy streak at one point and it got broken like in 2017, 2018, somewhere in that ballpark. It's been a while since the Detroit Red Wings, an original six team, a franchise that has many Stanley Cups, they need to get back to the playoffs. It's been a minute. And they added Patrick Kane last year to their roster. Never thought I would see Patrick Kane in a Detroit Red Wings sweater after years and years and years of playing for the Chicago Blackhawks. It's still an eyesore, but Patrick Kane, he surprised me, honestly. I thought he was done after he got hip surgery because his tenure with the Rangers didn't really go all that well. But he was really good with the Red Wings. And the Red Wings also added Vladimir Tarasenko, another veteran piece who recently won a Stanley Cup with the Florida Panthers. And you got some young assets in Mo Seider, Dylan Larkin. You can't really call him a young guy because he has many years of NHL experience under his belt. Believe it or not, I was actually stunned to realize, like, whoa, he's been in the league for how long? Well, he is the captain of the Red Wings. But anyway, Dylan Larkin, Mo Seider, Vladimir Tarasenko, Patrick Kane. I think you got a perfect mix of young guys and veteran pieces. Are the Red Wings a threat to win the Stanley Cup? No, but they're intriguing. Like, they got my attention. I'll just say that. All right. Before we wrap up today's episode and you guys gear up for the start of the new NHL season, let me tell you about Game Time. I've actually used the Game Time app before to purchase myself some MLB and NBA tickets. Game Time Picks curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Seat views. Get a good view of your seat in the app before you buy. All-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Game Time ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time, everybody. Yes, indeed. It is game time because the Devils are going to play the Sabres in a few hours in Prague. So I got to wrap this up a little bit more. But anyway, we got a few more that I want to share. All right. What do you expect out of the first season from Sheldon Keefe? Simple. It's playoffs or bust, because this Devils team is far too talented to miss the playoffs. They might get off to a slow start, and I'll touch on that momentarily, but this team can definitely go far in the Stanley Cup playoffs if all goes well for them and they stay relatively healthy. I know a lot of people in Canada, particularly I think Ottawa, Montreal, like to make jokes at the expense of the Maple Leafs. I know a lot of other people in the States love to make jokes at the expense of the Maple Leafs, and it sometimes carries over at the expense of someone who's had some sort of association with the Maple Leafs. In this case, Sheldon Keefe, his prior team was the Maple Leafs, and the thing is, like, the joke is like the Maple Leafs always make it to the first round, but they lose in the first round. Like, they're always in discussions to possibly win the Stanley Cup, but they're like the Dallas Cowboys or the New York Yankees, which is, despite having a stacked history, despite always having decent expectations going into the season, they always seem to fall short. And the last time the Leafs won a Stanley Cup, Mom and Dad, I am sorry in advance, but neither of my parents were born then. Just putting that out there, but digressing a little bit. If the Devils make it to the first round, that's an improvement compared to last year. So the joke's on you. I'm just saying, like, I've been seeing on social media, like, the Devils will just be first round exits this upcoming season because Sheldon Keefe is behind the bench. I'm just like, okay, that's an improvement. Anything else is gravy. That joke kind of backfires on you. So yeah, that's my expectations for Sheldon Keefe. Playoff or bust. And finally, what is your points prediction for the Devils at the end of the season, and where do they finish in the Metro? Oh, I hate this so much because a lot can happen. And as I've said in prior episodes, math is not exactly my strong suit. That's why I studied communications. I said they'll finish either first or second in the Metro with 100 points, but I'm predicting that they will get off to a slow start. Like I said in a prior episode, this Devils team is revamped. They're a little new, especially with a new head coach behind the bench. If the Devils get off to a slow start, cool your jets. I think that's to be expected, especially since they had an abbreviated training camp and preseason. There's a lot of moving pieces to this mechanism. I think the Devils will figure it out. It might take them a couple weeks, though. So if they drop their first two games in Prague, go a little easy on them. Don't throw in the towel. Don't wave the white flag. The season won't be over right then and there. I'm just saying, like, the Devils will be good, and I think they're going to be in a prime position to make the playoffs, but I think they're just going to get off to a little bit of a slow start. And that might be a hot take, but take it how you want to take it. And no, it's not based on preseason. Well, I guess it's based on preseason just a little bit, but it's just like they're going to make mistakes that they're not accustomed to. They're going to see themselves in uncomfortable positions, and they might look somewhat vulnerable, but we'll see how fast they're able to gel together. But let me know what you guys think. What are some of your season predictions? And get them in fast before the puck drops, because once it drops, your picks and your predictions, they lock in. And also, what are your thoughts on Kevin Labanc? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast streaming service, hit me up on my personal X page app at TreyMatt4 or the show's X page app at Locked On Devils. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. Continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys next episode. Thanks for listening once again.